Well, hello and welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar presentation titled Overcoming Retrogression Anxiety. We are being joined today, as always, by nurses and others from around the world, and we thank you for your time. We thank you for your interest, and look forward to sharing, hopefully, some very practical information with everyone today. My name is Ron Hoppe. I have the pleasure of serving as CEO of WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions, and this webinar today is being presented in response to many inquiries and conversations that we're having with registered nurses from around the world on a daily basis on various aspects and various responses that they're having to the questions that they have related to visa retrogression. So that's going to be the focus of our presentation today, overcoming retrogression anxiety. Next slide, please. All right, there we go. So before we get into the actual content of today's presentation, I thought it would be helpful to spend just a couple of moments on the retrogression sort of facts for just a moment. So we've prepared this chart here. This is going to be probably something different than you've ever seen before. But what we've done here is we've taken a 5-year look back on a month-by-month basis to see what the retrogression was measured by number of months. So on the far left, we're starting off, I think, in mid-2018. And you can see there that the retrogression at that point was around 22 months. And you can see that these bars in this chart fluctuate up and down pretty significantly. And then you can see kind of just starting left of center and then going right of center, there's a whole stretch of time where there appear to be no bars. And that period of time primarily encapsulated the pandemic and the time immediately after the pandemic, during which time the visa priority dates were current. All right, visa priority dates were current during that time. And then you can see last year, starting in May of 2023, the bars started going up again in May. We were at 11 months, and then it went up to 12 months. And then by the time we got to August, September of last year, excuse me, we were pushing 40 months delay. So if we were talking about retrogression last year in September or August or September rather, we would have been looking at a backlog of about 40 months. And then you can see when we got around to October, those October, November, December, January, the processing backlog or the delay in months started to come down again, was pretty steady for the first part of 2024. And now you can see with the July Visa Bulletin, that bar has gone up again. So the point here is simply to remind us that visa retrogression, is always part of the reality that we're dealing with. And secondly, as this 5-year chart indicates, that we see significant changes to the visa priority dates as time goes along from month to month. Now, you'll also see 2 red lines kind of traversing this graph from left to right. The lower red line represents 12 months of time, and the upper red line represents 24 months. And the reason the reason I've placed these red lines across here is because when we look back over the last 5 years, even if the priority dates were less, or the backlog was less than 12 months, or even when the Visa Bulletin was current, processing times were fairly regularly taking up to 12 months. There was a few cases that would be completed more quickly, but just as average, or as just normal processing, that 12-month timeline really was what was being expected in reality. So Visa priority date current, but actual processing times 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, 12 months. If your application was filed at that time, or if you had colleagues whose application was filed while the priority dates were current, you might recall that those at that time, petitions were being filed with premium processing. But as we've gotten into the dates not being current and the times getting elongated, premium processing no longer made sense. Now, the upper red line at the 24-month mark, that kind of represents the outside parameters of processing times that we've seen when Visa priority dates have been current or the backlog has been less than 24 months. So the indication that we're trying to give here is that historically, we've been operating in an environment where this 12 to 24 month processing cycle has actually been pretty constant. It's been something that is really forms a part of the cadence of the international recruitment industry. And we feel very, very comfortable when the Visa priority dates are in this range of up to 24 months. Now, currently, we're a little bit beyond that, and we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But I thought it would be very helpful just to give this short historical perspective on Visa processing times looking back over 5 years. Next slide, please. So given the July 2024 Visa Bulletin, right, the next reasonable question is, okay, that's interesting, Ron. Now what? What do we do now? So I think for purposes of our discussion today, and again, we're not here to do a super deep dive into the technicalities of retrogression, but just from a very practical perspective, I think there's a couple of things that are important to know. We're about to be in July, so July, August, September. So for the next 3 months, I think it would be unrealistic to expect that the visa processing times or the retrogression time is going to become shorter. We would be hopeful that the backlog won't become any greater, but I think the reality of the matter is between now and the end of September, or the September Visa Bulletin, we would be hopeful that the priority dates would stay right around where they are right now. As you may be aware, the U.S. government fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th each year. And at the beginning of a new fiscal year, October 1st, that's also when a new annual allotment of visas become available. So we are hopeful that come the October Visa Bulletin, that we will see the processing times come back in, that they'll come back into well within that 12 to 24 month range, which, as I've shared, has kind of been the historical pattern. So we're not expecting, or we're not hoping for any further delays between now and the end of September, or the September Visa Bulletin. And we do expect that when the October Visa Bulletin is released, that for a period of time anyway, we will see visa processing times become shorter, and hopefully a similar pattern as what we saw in October of 23 going into the beginning of 24. Hopefully we see similar type of pattern at the latter part of 2024 heading into 2025. Next slide, please. So that's in a business as usual situation. We get a lot of questions about what's happening with, is there any new legislation or regulatory reforms that might be enacted that could also help return the priority dates to current or to make processing time shorter. If you've been around this issue for any length of time, you'll be familiar with something known as the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act. It continues to be pending in the U.S. Congress, right? U.S. elected officials are very, very aware of this issue. It's recently received, again, significant media coverage, talking about the urgent need for nurses and the urgent need for some form of regulatory or legislative reform. And all of the large healthcare associations, healthcare advocacy groups continue to be very, very actively advocating for things such as the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act that would create new visas for physicians and nurses, legislation that would also, in the current version of the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, do that in a very streamlined way by simply recapturing unused visas from previous years. And there's a number of proposals that are being considered. Suffice to say, it's an ongoing process, and the U.S. is headed into a federal election here in November of this year, just a few months away. We recently did a webinar presentation on the likely impact of the U.S. election on immigration, particularly legal employment-based immigration. You can find a recording of that webinar on our YouTube channel. And if you weren't able to join us at that time, review that webinar presentation since, I would encourage you to visit WorldWide HealthStaff's YouTube channel and review that webinar presentation on the likely impacts that the U.S. election may have. But with that bit of background and that bit of sort of update provided, I want to move on to really the focus of our presentation today. And again, that is, dealing with the anxiety and the emotions that come from particularly this latest Visa Bulletin, and just the general uncertainty around not so much the immigration process itself, but just the time that it takes for an application from start to finish, and more particularly, how long your application is taking. So if we could get to the next slide, please. So in speaking about the various ways in which retrogression causes a personal toll, I had invited my good friend, author, and counselor Ted Hall to join us to speak on this topic with you today. Unfortunately, Ted let me know last night that he had a family circumstance arise, an emergency situation involving a family member. So he's unable to join us today. We'll certainly have another presentation of this nature soon, where Ted, I'm sure, will be able to join us. But he has shared his notes with me, so I'm happy to communicate some thoughts with you on behalf of Ted, and we'll look forward to having him join us sometime soon. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I think when we're talking about the emotions that are attached to dealing with retrogression, I think the immediate response that everyone has when things aren't moving as quickly as you would hope or as quickly as you had expected, the first emotion that you experience is one of disappointment, right? Disappointment. And that disappointment is simply when your expectations are not in alignment with what's really happening. You expected something to happen, in this period of time, and now you've just received information that it's going to take a longer period of time. And naturally, it is natural. It is only natural to feel disappointed, and it's understandable. And there's no reason not to feel disappointment. But a couple of thoughts in terms of how you can deal with that disappointment and overcome that disappointment. Because the reality is, and not to oversimplify or minimize this, right? Your disappointment and the visa processing times are two separate issues, right? And the visa processing times are part of the reality that we need to deal with. So I think the first thing to keep in mind, or the first thing to recall when you're feeling disappointed, is to understand that this disappointment is natural, and you're going to feel it over time like a wave, right? Waves go up and waves go down, and you should expect that feelings of disappointment will come in waves. At certain times, you'll feel more disappointed. At other times, perhaps less. But just like a wave, right, when a tall wave comes, that wave does pass and it does fade over time. So just because you're feeling disappointed in the moment, you can remain optimistic and hopeful because that disappointment will pass. In this type of situation, I think it's also very, very important to be able to adjust your expectations, right? Disappointment comes when expectations aren't aligned with reality. So if there is a new reality, it's going to require some flexibility in order to align expectations with what the current reality is. And a lack of flexibility is only going to make your disappointment worse. So, for example, if you had a colleague who had a petition filed 2 years ago, and they were granted a visa in 11 months, and your mindset is, well, my friend got a visa in 11 months. I want to get a visa. Why can't I get a visa in 11 months? Your expectations are not in alignment with the current reality, and it's only going to make your feelings of disappointment worse. So having some flexibility, realigning expectations, really, really important. And then this is maybe easier said than done, particularly in an immediate moment, but I think it's also an essential aspect of successfully dealing with disappointment, and that is keeping an eye on the big picture, right? And the big picture is going to be a little bit different for everyone, but I think for everyone who is on this presentation today, an important part of your big picture is the ability to live and work in the United States, right? Maybe you've made plans to be here by a certain date, and that plan has now been delayed, right? There's a difference between delayed, right, and stopped, or delayed and discontinued, right? So focusing on the big picture, in every aspect of life, disappointment is a part of life. Not to say it's enjoyable, but it is a part of life. And I think when we consider particularly the issue of immigration to the U.S., Having a perspective on time is also very, very important, right? So when we say, well, processing times were 18 to 24 months, now they're 24 to 30 months, right? It's basically a difference of 6 months. Just think about what you were doing 24 or 30 months ago prior to today. Think how quickly that time has gone by to get you to today, and focus on how quickly that time is likely to pass with everything else that you have going on in your life, right? And the likelihood that 24 and 30 months is going to go by faster than you think. And before you know it, you'll be having your visa in hand and on your way to the US. And that assumes, right, that we don't get faster processing times or immigration legislation or regulatory relief in the meantime. So in dealing with disappointment, it's important to understand that disappointment comes in waves. It will fade. It also requires all of us to adjust our expectations from time to time in the context of the current reality. And it's always helpful and important that we continue to focus on the big picture and have the right perspective on time. Now, we acknowledge that for some individuals, the emotional challenge of retrogression goes beyond simply being disappointed. We can go to the next slide, please. For some, the uncertainty around retrogression, the time that it's taking, can lead to anxiety, unhealthy levels of anxiety, feelings of panic attacks. This is a very serious condition for any individual to find themselves in. And it's important to recognize that feelings of anxiety or feelings of panic can very quickly begin to interfere with your daily activities and can be difficult to control. So if you feel this profound disappointment and it's starting to impact your daily activities, lack of concentration on a task, lack of concentration at work, emotional outbursts, these are all strong signs that your disappointment has gone further and that you are now experiencing real life anxiety with regards to the feelings that you are experiencing. When you feel very, very anxious, and if you are feeling very, very anxious around this topic, or you feel even at times panicked, right? It's also important to remind yourself that this emotion of great anxiety or panic, is usually, and I would suggest in the case of retrogression, out of proportion to the actual danger, right? So in this case, the actual danger would be defined as it's going to take me longer to get to the US. But this feeling of anxiety or panic is out of proportion in relation to the danger. Retrogression doesn't say you're never coming to the United States. It doesn't say that. It says it's going to take a few months longer or a few months shorter in some cases, right? So if you're feeling this sense of my application is never going to be completed, I'm never coming to the US, why didn't I start sooner? Am I working with the right employer? These are genuine feelings of anxiety. And if they persist, we'll talk about some tips here for dealing with that and other steps that you can take. So check yourself. Are you experiencing emotions that are interfering with your daily activities or you're finding difficult to control? If so, try to remind yourself that these emotions, in this case, are out of proportion in relation to the challenge that retrogression poses. And there's things that you can do, very practical things that you can do to deal with these types of very strong feelings or very strong emotions. Very simply, and this is a tip I think that applies in many circumstances, but it certainly applies here. And that is, when you're feeling this emotion of anxiety, just stop for a minute, take some deep, slow breaths, try to calm yourself, and just take a few quiet moments away from others, away from distractions, and take some deep, slow breaths. Another thing to be very mindful of when people are regularly feeling anxious about anything, a very common response to that is to withdraw from others. Right? You feel that nobody feels the way I feel. Nobody will understand my situation. My situation is unique. It's different from everybody else's situation. They're just not going to understand. And persons dealing with ongoing anxiety tend to start to withdraw in their, from contact with others. So when you're having feelings of anxiety, it's important that you are mindful of this tendency to withdraw and that you try to counteract that by staying in contact with others. Try not to break routines with your friends, with your coworkers, with your family. Make sure you're staying in contact with others. When you are dealing with persistent feelings of anxiety, it is also a common response is to play the what if game, right? What if? And that what if will go one of two ways. You will either look backwards and say, why didn't I do this sooner? What if I would have done this? What if? And you can plug in 50 different what if questions, and you'll make yourself crazy. Alternatively, you can play the what if game in the future, looking to the future, imagining all sorts of catastrophic things that could happen, the likelihood of them actually happening being about zero, but you can become preoccupied with that what if game. So it's very important to stay in the present, right? Be proactive. And we're going to talk about this further in a couple more minutes, right? One of the ways that you can help deal with anxiety and panic is to be proactive. Don't get passive. Say, okay, this is my situation. Remember, we talked a few minutes ago about adjusting expectations. And what can I do to make my situation as good as it can possibly be going forward? So be proactive. Don't get passive, right? Make sure you're getting out. Make sure you're moving around. You're being active. Don't withdraw. Don't become passive. And maybe the biggest tip I can share with you of all of these, or the most important when you're dealing with ongoing feelings of anxiety, is take a break from social media. Take a break from social media generally, and take a break from social media, from groups and sites where topics of immigration and retrogression are being discussed, where there's accurate information, there's inaccurate information, there's speculation that's out there. That is not going to be helpful. Take a break from that. So if you find that your disappointment is turning into anxiety, please be mindful that if you're having your daily routine being disrupted, it's important to apply these types of tips. Talk to your recruiter, talk with your immigration attorney. Stay focused, stay in the present, and be proactive. I'm going to take just a short break here. I see that I've been joined on our presentation by my good friend and colleague, Mike Hammond. Many of you will know Mike. Mike is one of the leading immigration healthcare attorneys in the country. Mike and I go back many, many years. Mike, great that you could jump on this morning, or today rather. How are you doing?
Good, Ron. Thank you.
Good. CJ, if you could just go back to that first slide. I'm gonna just interject here for a moment, and just want to go back to that first retrogression slide. And I'm going to ask Mike just to share a few comments because he's been good enough to join us here this morning. So, Mike, what I had shared with our guests here earlier today is this new type of chart that we just came up with this, and it basically shows the number of months of retrogression going back month by month over 5 years. Those are the bars. Where there's no bars, that's the time we had current priority dates. And the red lines, the lower one being at about 12 months, the upper one being at about 24 months, to give a rough indication of what the actual processing times have been, even when the priority dates have been current and when they've been up to 24 months or less. So try to make the point that even when the priority dates were current, lots of applications were taking 12 months. Some were getting through in 9, 10, 11, 11. But just that's kind of, even in normal, what we would call normal times, kind of 12 to 24 months. We're a little bit outside of that now. So just would be interested in your perspective, your thoughts on just what we're trying to convey here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ron. I think that's very accurate. It's hard to get even without retrogression, it's difficult to get the processing time below 12 months. We saw a little bit of that in COVID. However, keep in mind during COVID, healthcare workers were still allowed to go get visa appointments at the consulate because they were healthcare workers, but no one else was. So the consulate's normal process of dealing with visas for family members and other types of employees, et cetera, that had all stopped, and they could focus all their full efforts simply on healthcare workers, which is what allowed us to get some processing, as Ron mentioned, somewhere in that 8, 9, 10 months sometimes category. However, post-COVID, consulates are back to normal, and they're processing all types of visas, et cetera. And so the idea of, even if we had current priority dates today, I do not think it would be reasonable to think that we would have under 12 months of processing time. I think we would still be in the 12 to 18 month time frame. So as long as retrogression stays under that 18 months processing time, then, or 12 months in that range, then I think we're going to see retrogression move alongside at the same time, basically the same pace as processing time. So I think we have to consider that during COVID, that was our period of aberration. We're now back to normal. We had normal for many years. Not only if we took this chart and expanded it back even further, we could go back 15 years ago till we had some special exemption for RNs, and we would still see 12 to 18 month processing times. So I think that part is very true and very accurate, and a good kind of get the expectations right of more, and maybe in the 18 to 24 month is what I've been saying. I think another thing that's really important and kind of a positive thing to think about is what's happening in the summer. So as Ron mentioned, the government's fiscal year starts on October 1st, and the visas that are allocated each year are only allocated for that year. So it starts October 1st, it ends September 30th. any visas or green cards, immigrant visas and green cards are interchangeable terms. Any visas that are not issued by September 30th are wasted, okay? They don't carry over, which means it's really important to use as many of those visas as possible during that fiscal year. That makes the system work better. So if there's 100,000 visas issued for a year, if we only use 80,000 of them, then 20,000 are wasted. And for the system overall, that's a bad thing. If we use 99,000 of them, that's a good thing. However, what it does is it creates this feeling during the summer that things are worse than they really are. So if we used all of the visas up and passed them all out from October 1st until May 1st, it would look like horrible. Oh my God, the line is going to be forever. Or maybe we'll even get the dreaded U in the category, which means unavailable, which we look at and go, oh, that's terrible. We're never going to get visas again. All that means is we used up all of them. And so that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So looking at the rest of we got 2 more bulletins left this summer. July obviously spiked. August, September, we might even go to a U. That's okay. That has nothing to do with a case that's pending. That has nothing to do. It just means that today we're out. And to give you some perspective, in fiscal year 2021, we had 260-some thousand employment visas available, and they only used 195,000 of them. So that means 70,000 people that could have gotten a green card did not get a green card in fiscal year 2021 because the system was inefficient. However, for the last 2 fiscal years, the system has been extremely efficient. So we went to fiscal year 2022 with 281,500 visas available, and they used a little over 280,000 of them. So about as efficient as the government can possibly get, within less than 1,000 out of over 281,000. And in fiscal year 2023, we had 197,000 of visas available, and they used about 194,000 of them. So again, not quite as efficient as in fiscal year 2022, but still very, very efficient for the government's perspective. This year, we have 161,000 available, and they're on pace to issue somewhere in the 155 to 158,000, which is good again. So think of the next bulletin. Now, I'm going to give you some advice that you're not going to follow because I don't follow it myself. Don't look at the August and September bulletin. It's just going to be sad again. But I'm going to look too, and you are too, because that's just who we are as people. But the first bulletin you're going to see positive news is the October bulletin, which is going to be issued around September, middle September is our expectation. And that's when we should see some movement. Not only do I believe it'll be restored back to where it was earlier this year, I think it'll push forward even further. So I think there's some good news coming, and I think we should view the summer retrogression as a positive thing, not a negative thing. So,
okay. Mike, while I was listening to you share that explanation, which was great, I find myself feeling some of these emotions that I've been talking about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
So thanks for reinforcing the content here this morning.
Hey, no problem.
Mike, I'm gonna call on you in a minute here when we're gonna get to talking about things that candidates can be doing now. But let me just kind of wrap up sort of the train of thought that I was sharing in terms of how individuals and our guests here can deal with their disappointment of the priority dates not getting better, but in fact moving backwards for a period of time. I think Mike also gave a very helpful perspective. What you can do personally if you find your disappointment is actually turning into anxiety or feelings of panic. And if we can move forward to the slide on anger, that would be great. So when individuals that are dealing with disappointment are dealing with anxiety, often that is going to then also morph or turn into feelings of anger. And quite honestly, sometimes we've heard those expressions of anger from our candidates that are saying, well, why didn't you do this? And why can't you make, my petition go faster? And, just angry inquiries, accusations, all coming from this place of disappointment, anxiety, and coming out in anger. And ultimately, anger is an expression of the emotion of feeling powerless, right? When we as individuals find ourselves in a circumstance where we feel powerless, okay, think of a traffic jam. I experienced that earlier today, this morning coming to work, right? Feeling of powerlessness. Here I am, I'm in this situation, it's bad, it's going to make me late, and there's nothing that I can do about it, right? What's the response? It's anger. So if you find yourself feeling angry about how your immigration case is proceeding, or you're feeling angry about just the process overall, it's important to understand where that feeling is coming from. And ultimately, it is the expression of feeling powerless in a particular situation, right? When we are unable to correct or improve a situation, negative emotions often converge into anger. So whether it's disappointment, whether it's anxiety, whether it's anger, these are the range of emotions that you may experience as you are traveling down the road on your immigration journey. These feelings are normal if they occur for a period of time. If you're, as I said, if you're feeling anxious or having other emotional episodes that you feel are becoming uncontrollable, then in addition to the tips that we've shared, you probably want to be speaking with a healthcare professional to see if there's any other type of support that might be useful to you. Obviously, whether you're dealing directly with a recruitment agent or an employer or an immigration attorney, they're always, open to having a discussion with you, to providing you, hopefully, with the most up-to-date and accurate information to help address how it is you may be feeling in the moment as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. So, looking now at the whole situation and how you deal with these emotions. And how do you get to a place of being hopeful? How do you get from being disappointed to being hopeful? How do you get from being anxious to being hopeful? How do you get from being angry to being hopeful in uncertain times when you don't know exactly what the next visa bulletins are going to say? There's a number of very practical things that we can all do in these situations. The first is always to remember what you are thankful for. It's easy to get caught in this trap of focusing on everything that's not the way we would like it or things that haven't worked out. But first and foremost, let's remind ourselves to be thankful for the things that we do have, the friends, the families, the jobs, right? All the plans for the future. Let's remember the many, many things that we are thankful for. I think you will very quickly find that they far outnumber the things that are causing disappointment or anxiety. Focus on what you can look forward to, right? I have found this to be a very, very true and effective strategy over the last couple of years, 10 years, 12 years. As my parents got older and my wife's parents got older, just kind of, could see very clearly when they had something to look forward to, when we talked to them about the next time we were coming to visit or the next time they were coming to visit us, this reality of having something to look forward to, I found that it very much brightened their outlook for the days ahead. I found this to be true in my own life in various circumstances, focusing on what's possible tomorrow, focusing on what is going to happen if I'm patient and if I'm persistent. And then lastly, in order to be hopeful in uncertain times, it's important that you're hanging around people who live their life with an attitude of the glass is half full, positive people. If you're dealing with someone that's only constantly reinforcing your feelings of disappointment or anxiety or contributing to them, you need to get away from those people, whoever they may be, right? You will be more successful. You will have greater peace of mind in direct relation to the people that you're hanging around with. The glass is half full or the glass is half empty. And depending on your view of how the glass is for you, it's going to impact your day, your week, your month, your year very dramatically. So why not, to put yourself in the best possible position, focus on surrounding yourself with people whose glass is half full, right? I think that's why Mike and I get along for these many, many years. We both see the glass as half full. I think that's true, Mike. Either that or we just have half a glass.
We have half a glass and we're good.
And it's completely full. It's completely full.
Totally full.
Good. All right. So if we could get to the next slide, please. And Mike, yeah, there we go. And Mike, if I could get you to speak to this point. So here we are. People might feel a little bit stuck in the process, or that the process is stuck, but there are things, important things that they can and need to be doing in the meantime. We've listed just a few here. If you could speak to these and add any others that you think would be helpful for our guests here today, of things they can be doing right now to put themselves in the best possible position.
Sure. So my take on this is to do everything that you can control. We can't control retrogression. We can't control how long it takes the consult to schedule our appointment, but we can control our own selves and our own actions. And that includes things mentioned right here, like having your English taken and having that passed, having your the visa screen process in hand and checking the date on it because it expires in 5 years, keeping up with your clinical skills. If there's documents needed for the NVC process, whatever is needed as part of the process, make sure you're doing your part so that your part's done, so that when the government does move, then I think then you will be ready. And I think it also gives us a little bit of feeling of empowerment that, hey, I took care of something that needed to be done. I checked that off and move that forward. And then if I might caution on a couple of things that I think sometimes we tend to do, which I put under the category of chasing windmills, as kind of an ode to Don Quixote, for those of you who may have read that novel. And I'm taking a little liberties with it, but nonetheless, is I constantly am getting people who are saying, hey, because of retrogression, can I do X? I had a conversation with someone last week who's an ICU nurse who said, I am going to do a graduate degree so I can get my MSN. And then I heard that I can get an H-1B visa as a nurse educator. I've done my research on it. They get them all the time. They're approved all the time. And then I can come into the U.S. and then get a green card. And I said 100% of that is true. You can do all that. Do you want to be a nurse educator? Well, not really. I really like working in the ICU. Well, how long is it going to take you to get that MSN? A year and a half if I do part of it online. I said, well, your option that you have laid out is great. It does work, but you're going to then be doing something you don't want to do. That's not your career path that you picked. And it's going to actually take you longer than if you just stayed the course that you were in. And I think sometimes we're looking for panaceas. We hear something and we're like, oh, let me try that. And most of the time, I'm not saying don't explore things, But most of the times, those rabbits we're chasing or those windmills we put out there that we believe in aren't real, they're imaginary. So I think we want to be careful, particularly also if someone comes along, some employer, some recruiter comes along and tells you, hey, I've got a solution for you. I can get you here in 3 months or 6 months or something, or tells you retrogression will not affect you. It doesn't apply to you. None of that is true. So you want to be very, very careful during this time that you're kind of staying the course and working with reputable people.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mike. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just one thought that I'd like to leave with everyone before we take some time for a few questions and answers is a quote from former U.S. President Calvin Coolidge, and it focuses on the attribute of persistence. Right? Persistence, sticking with something. And Calvin Coolidge famously said, nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated failures. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Persistence and determination, I think, are the two most accurate words that describe the attitude that candidates need to have in their immigration journey to the U.S. I've certainly found in the course of my career that persistence and determination, when I look back, have served well. They will serve you well. I appreciate that these things are sometimes easier said than done, but I would encourage each of you to have a focus on remaining persistent, remaining determined, and you will achieve the goals that you have set for yourself, the goals that you set for your family, and you will have the benefit and be able to enjoy a brighter future for yourself. So with that, I'm going to call on my colleague, CJ. I know we've had many, many questions coming in today. And in the few minutes we have remaining, CJ, if you'd guide us through a few questions, I would just say this. We've had a number of questions about how's the U.S. election going to impact, or could it impact immigration? As I shared at the outset, we did a webinar presentation on that topic a few weeks ago. Please go to our YouTube channel, and you can view a complete webinar presentation there. We're also getting a number of inquiries from individuals that are asking about processing times for nurse aides or caregivers. We've also done a number of webinars on that topic, and you will find recordings of those on our YouTube channel as well. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of those resources. So CJ, questions that either Mike or myself may be able to respond to.
Okay, Ron. So let's go with this first question from Leanne. She said, in terms of retrogression, is it wise to choose the follow to join option for dependents, or would these greatly increase their wait time to join their parents?
Mike.
Yeah, so generally speaking, we encourage people to process the entire family unit together. That gives the greatest chance of being actually all issued your visas at the exact same time. You do have 6 months to enter after the visa is issued. So you can certainly have a situation where if you wanted the RN to enter first and then the family to enter later, that's perfectly fine as long as it's within that 6-month period of time. Anytime you do a follow to join, you run a risk of retrogression, particularly during the summer, impacting things, because your date may have been current when you were interviewed, you got your visa issued, but now the dates have retrogressed and your family is no longer current. But even if the family stays current, follow to join is always going to be slower because they're obviously choosing to, I don't want to come now, I want to come later. And so you're dealing with appointments at the consulate and paperwork and all of that kind of stuff. So general answer, best answer, all come together. I realize that's not always possible, but definitely speak to your account rep, your account manager, or your immigration attorney if that's something that you're looking at. And we'll certainly do our best so that you can at least make a wise decision for your family.
All right, thanks, Mike. And another question is from Felix. And the question is, after your ETA is approved, how long will it take before your sponsor apply for your USCIS?
Well, this question must have to do with a different occupation, because registered nurses and physical therapists are under what are called Schedule A, and they're not required to go through the ETA perm process. If you're a med tech, that may be the most common healthcare worker occupation that goes through the perm process. After that perm is approved, you can apply for the I-140 immediately after that. The perms are now emailed, so it happens fairly quickly. There's no longer any original perms that used to delay the process. So fairly quickly after the perm is approved, you can file for the USCIS I-140.
Okay. And another question. This one is from Roger. And considering my priority date is set in March of 2023, could you offer a speculative forecast on when I might expect my immigration status to be updated to current? Just a prediction, please.
Sure, I'm happy to. I love making predictions. I was on one of these similar calls about a month ago that wanted a prediction, and they wanted to know what I thought the date would go to in October Bulletin. And I told them that in anticipation of that, I'd gone out into my yard the night before and I'd counted the leaves on one of my bushes, and I'd gotten 117 leaves. And so I thought it would go to January 17th. That's probably as accurate as this prediction. But if I'm going to see, if you're at March 2023 and you want a prediction whatsoever, I'm going to say I think by first quarter 2025 you'll be current. How about that?
That's cool.
That's a good prediction. So CJ, make a note that in January 2025 we're doing a presentation with Mike
and Roger's got to come back. Roger, wherever you're at in this world, you got to come back, man, for that. And if you're here in the States, you can come in here and sit in my office with me, and we can do it together.
All right, CJ, we have time. We have time for one more question. I know there's many questions coming in. We'll do our best to respond as many as we can after our presentation today. But CJ, we've got time to take one more question live, please.
Okay. This is an interesting question from Jessica. So the question is, what will happen to us if ever retrogression will continue and our employer will abandon us?
I'll take that one. I think, and it's a fair question. I think the reality of the matter, particularly in the health staff direct hire model, is that once an applicant's petition has been filed, employers are quite patient to wait. A, they've made an investment in your application, and B, it's not costing them anything more to wait for your arrival to arrive in the United States. Let's even take it up a level from there. Retrogression or not, the reality remains that there is a profound shortage of nurses in the United States. There are more open positions than there's available qualified applicants. It is frustrating to you as an applicant, and it is frustrating to your sponsoring employer, as it is frustrating to us when processing takes longer than expected. In very rare occasions, some employers have said, we're just not going to wait. We got a problem, but we don't care. We're not going to wait. This usually happens at an employer site when maybe a new management team comes in, or maybe a facility has been bought or sold and is now owned by another operator that doesn't really understand or have a connection to this international recruitment program. So it does happen on rare occasions where employers will say we're discontinuing our program. Where we have encountered this in the past, again, very, very rare, your application will become even more valuable to employers that are actively carrying on with their international recruitment plan. If you have an approved petition, that priority date can be recaptured and applied to a new filing. So depending on the priority date, how it unfolds, the ability to recapture an old priority date, even if your initial employer abandons you, you may be able to arrive in the United States with a very, very minimal delay to what your original timeline may have been. So not to dismiss the question, these things have happened on very rare occasions. But if you're dealing with a reputable and a larger organization that's working with many clients, they will be able to connect you with a new employer maybe in a matter of days. So I hope that provides some reassurance if that's your specific concern. Mike, thanks as always for joining today. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're working with some new technology here.
Ron, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks as
Happy
always.
to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope that in the information shared today, if you find yourself dealing with any of these emotions that we discussed briefly, I hope you're able to take away some practical tips. Hopefully, the information shared has been an encouragement to you today. We, as WorldWide HealthStaff and Mike at his firm, we've been doing this work each respectively for more than a quarter of a century. Mike even longer than us. There is this saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And I think when it comes to processing times fluctuating and being longer and shorter, it really is nothing new. But it's new. I appreciate it's new for you if you're just in this process for the first time. So I hope we've been able to be helpful and supportive to you today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time. We'd welcome your inquiry. We'd welcome your application. Please look forward or please be watching our social media channels for upcoming future webinar presentations on a wide variety of topics. We look forward to having you join us. We look forward to being able to share additional useful information with you. In the meantime, I wish you all a great rest of your day, wherever in the world you may be, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.